Welcome again. It appears that we're ready to get underway. I would like to welcome everyone again to the Big Questions. My name is Kevin Wooten. I will act as your co-host along with my friend and colleague, Mr. Dwayne Busby, who is the Executive Director for Strategic Partnerships. So today is our inaugural kickoff for the President's Big Questions series. We'll be focusing on the future of higher education all day today, along with another event that will be scheduled for the 13th of November. So we have actually 4 wonderful opportunities today to share with you. At 9 o'clock, of course, we're kicking off starting the new university and of course, transforming higher education. We have a wonderful panel that we'll introduce in just one moment. We also later today have 3 separate workshops, one by Dr. Chris Dede called the 60-Year Curriculum, another by Jennifer Jarratt. It's entitled The Transformation of Work in the Post-Pandemic World and Digital Economy. And last but not least, we have a workshop later this afternoon with Peter Bishop, Dr. Peter Bishop, entitled How to Integrate Future Thinking into Your Curriculum. So today is about very broad topics that I think will influence everyone's life. And it is so important for us as an educational institution and for our communities to begin thinking about what that future will really look like. So that being said, I'm going to turn the program over to Dwayne, who is going to review a couple of the housekeeping activities and rules that will help us navigate very efficiently today. So Dwayne, if you'd be so kind.
Wooten, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. To make this event run as efficient as possible, here are a few guidelines. All participants, except for the co-hosts and the presenters, will be muted. Please submit your questions to the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen, just to the right of the word participants. We will use the last 15 minutes to present the questions to the panel. We will try to address as many questions as possible. They'll be addressed in the order that they were received. And Dr. Wooten and I will read them to the panelists. Following the presentation, there will be a virtual reception for the presenters and the panelists. This will be a wonderful opportunity to address any additional questions you may have, or an opportunity just to say hello. So before we begin, we would like to share with you 2 videos. The first involves information about UHCL, and the second is a welcome video from Dr. Ira K. Blake, the president of University of Houston Clear Lake.
Diverse city, University of Houston Clear Lake, with more than 45 years of educating leaders and innovators in the nation's 4th largest and most diverse city, University of Houston Clear Lake is the place to launch the future. The university is uniquely embedded in the city's hub for technology and petrochemical industries, located minutes from NASA Johnson Space Center. Through powerful educational experiences and strong partnerships with alumni and community leaders, UHCL continues to make an impact. Campus locations in Clear Lake, Pearland, and the Texas Medical Center keep UHCL connected to Houston's thriving business and medical communities. More than 90 degree programs have propelled our 73,000 alumni to become CEOs, entrepreneurs, educators, astronauts, scientists, and community leaders. The best part? We are just getting started. We are moving confidently into the future with a new mission and vision that will be key to transforming lives, communities, and the world.
Greetings and welcome. I am Dr. Ira K. Blake, President of the University of Houston Clear Lake. Welcome to our inaugural Big Questions speaker series. This will be a speaker series unlike others, as our objective is to create a network of individuals, organizations, scholars, and communities who aspire to clearly define and address issues that impact our collective future. We seek to both educate and mobilize community involvement by helping to translate our shared understanding of critical challenges and opportunities. One objective will be to collaboratively generate options and pragmatic plans for us all. We will work with the following assumptions. We live in unparalleled times, with many intersectional questions facing us that are economic, political, social, and health related. We are all looking to understand our own condition and to better understand our world. The Big Questions Speaker Series will help us all decide what the real questions are and where we should focus our search for solutions. As a public regional university in the fourth largest and most diverse city in the United States, Clear Lake is in a unique position to accomplish this work. Where technology meets human ingenuity, we are next door to NASA, adjacent to the nation's largest petrochemical corridor. And we've added 2 educational sites, one in the nation's largest and premier medical complex, the Texas Medical Center, and another in one of the nation's fastest growing diverse communities, the city of Pearland. So, what do we do with this opportunity? I feel strongly that Clear Lake is poised to become not only a nationally prominent university, but also a regional and national thought leader. We can become a thought leader by providing authoritative perspectives on the real issues of the day that can raise consciousness on our campus and in our region. So, our inaugural speaker series will be devoted to the future of higher education and will feature nationally prominent futurists who will lead a day-long series of panels, presentations, and workshops as we address the big questions of how do we prepare for the future of higher education. Later this fall, we will examine how higher education must transform its overall diversity, inclusion, and global perspectives. Again, we will provide world-class authorities on framing and addressing this critical issue. At Clear Lake, we want not only to provide a forum for learning and exploring, but also to connect constituents and community groups throughout the region and the country to collaborate in addressing big questions. We are the type of university that not only seeks to ask the right questions, but also to leverage partnerships to find comprehensive solutions. If we as an institution help frame these questions and work collaboratively with others to address big questions, then we will take another step closer to fulfilling our vision. In closing, let me again welcome you to this series. We hope you find great value in our efforts. More importantly, we hope to partner with you in changing our world.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Blake. So let's go ahead and begin the program. I'm so excited to be able to introduce and share with you 3 tremendous experts in the area of the future, which is what we're talking about today. So before I introduce each one, and I'll be very brief, as I think everyone has been provided in the registration process, their bios. I feel it incumbent upon me to let you know that all 3 of our presenters today and panelists are former University of Houston Clear Lake faculty. We're very proud of that. So let me go ahead and begin and introduce our 3 panelists. First, I would like to welcome Dr. Chris Dede. And Dr. Dede is the Timothy E. Worth Professor of Learning Technologies at the Harvard's Graduate School of Education. So he has served in many capacities. He has served as chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning, and he has been honored by Harvard University as an outstanding teacher. He's recently published and co-edited a new book called The 60-Year Curriculum, which is my understanding is many people in higher education are really focusing on this. So we're very fortunate to have Chris share his ideas with us. It really focuses on lifelong learning and how that will play out in the new digital, or the existing and the future digital economy. So welcome, welcome, Chris. So glad to have you here. I would next like to introduce Jennifer Jarratt, and Jennifer is a consultant and is a consultant to corporations and organizations worldwide. And she really helps organizations focus on, obviously, the factors that in the future that will impact their operations and their activities. She is the past board chair and a founding member of the Association of Professional Futurists. He has recently co-authored a body of work called Maine 2025, the state of Maine, helping the state of Maine project itself in the future. She has also written very extensively on the nature of work in the future. And given what has occurred recently, this of course is on everyone's mind, thinking about how we do work differently, hopefully even better. So welcome, Jennifer. So glad to have you here. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Peter Bishop. And Dr. Bishop is recently retired from the University of Houston system, and he is the founder and the executive director of an organization called Teach the Future, which has as its elementary and most fundamental purpose working with instructors and teachers at every level how to develop the future thinking skills of students at many different points of their education. Now Peter has published a number of really excellent books on future thinking, the most recent of which is called Teaching About the Future, the Basics of Foresight Education, co-authored with Dr. Andy Hines. So as you can see here, we have three world-renowned experts on the future. We're so delighted to have them back and join us again with the UH Clear Lake family. So this morning, I would like to kick off our first event, which is a panel discussion to explore the foundings of UH Clear Lake, where we're going, what is in store with respect to the future of higher education, and what that may mean for the University of Houston Clear Lake. So in doing this, what we will do is we've prepared a number of questions for Chris and Peter and Jennifer, and we will simply ask who would like to take the first attempt to answer that and ask the other panelists then to join in. So I'm looking forward to the integration of their different perspectives, and in particular how we can perhaps at the end of the session today think about what it is to be an institution of higher education in the future, and what does that mean for UH Clear Lake, and of really high importance, what does that mean for our community? So let me go ahead, and I'd like to begin with the first kind of topical area, which is which involves the social environment and the intellectual environment of the early years of UH Clear Lake. You heard on the introductory video that we are now 45 years old. And while that may be old to some people, that is very, very young in terms of academic institutions. So we have been here for 45 years. We're looking really forward to that 2025 and our 50th anniversary. So to help us start thinking about our journey forward, let's start to some extent how we began. And I would like to begin, Jennifer, Chris, and Peter, by asking you, when did you onboard at UH Clear Lake? I know each of you had a little different a period of time here. When did you onboard, and what attracted you to the University of Houston Clear Lake? So who would like to start us off this morning? All right, Chris, please.
So I was one of the 44 faculty who co-founded the university, and it's important to understand the context at that time. Richard Nixon had just been forced out of the presidency. The space program had completed Apollo and was ramping up to start building the space shuttle. And there'd been a huge oil shock in '73 when the Mideast raised the prices. In fact, when I drove down to UH Clear Lake from Massachusetts, one of the first things I saw when I got to Texas was a bumper sticker saying, "Drive fast, freeze a Yankee." And I realized that I had left Kansas and I was in Oz now in terms of what was going on. A couple years later, Houston was actually the city in the entire world that had the most construction going on in it because of the rise in the price of oil. So it was a period of enormous change and turbulence, and a time when everybody was trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And in that context, we showed up to start this new part of the University of Houston, which was described as an upper level campus, so juniors, seniors, and masters only, and was described as being interdisciplinary and having new and innovative programs like the Futures program. Now, at that time, all that there was the Arbor building, the Central Arbor building, because the Bayou building was still under construction. So it was very crowded with all of us in there. And we were busy planning, but we had no idea what the courses were going to be because we didn't know what the demand was going to be. It's like opening a restaurant where you don't have a theme. You're not a Mexican restaurant or a fried chicken place or a French restaurant. You just put all the food out there and you see what people want to order, and then that becomes what the restaurant is. So that first year, we all taught whatever needed to be taught, regardless of our background. I taught geology, which I had never had, but I had come in science education and futures, so I had some background in science. I taught what for several years was the most popular course on the campus, called Drugs and Behavior, in the psychology department. I won't reveal the background I had with drugs, but it wasn't perhaps as extensive as it might have been. And in fact, that course was the most popular course. That seemed to be what people wanted. And when the university leadership recognized that, they approached me and said, well, would you also teach the sex and behavior course? And I said, if I become known as the drugs and sex professor, I will never get tenured. So I turned them down, stayed with science education, stayed with futures research, offloaded the psychology course as soon as we got some psychology professors. But it was the Wild West when the campus started. And it was really a tremendous amount of fun, although there was also a lot of anxiety and ambiguity.
Wow. What a great story. What a great insight. Peter, how about yourself? Tell us when you onboarded and what those first couple of years meant to you, and in terms of what was going on and what brought you to Houston.
Sure, Kevin, it's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks, Chris, for introducing the times. Those times are not unlike they are today, I think, talking about the future of education and doing that kind of thing. Well, my motivation for coming to Clear Lake was a little bit more selfish. I wanted to get out of Statesboro, Georgia, mostly. Small town in Georgia. Actually, it was the fourth largest college in Georgia, Georgia Southern College, now university. But coming to the big city and was very attractive to me. But I also realized I came in '76, 2 years after Chris did, and I came to teach statistics, degree in sociology. And I met with Dean Calvin Cannon, who was the first dean of human sciences and humanities. In those days, they were hiring so many people. I was the third wave of new faculty, that Cal and I met at the Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta. And towards the end of our lunch, I had read, of course, through the catalog. It was pretty unusual, as Chris said, multidisciplinary, integrated education. And I found this one page that said Studies of the Future. And I said, what is that? And I'm afraid I probably had a little edge in my voice because, after all, I was a scientific sociologist. We don't study things that don't exist. And therefore, I was kind of skeptical that there is such a thing. Well, anybody that knows Cal Cannon knows that you don't get the best of him. He just shot right back at me and says, we study the past, don't we? And I said, well, yes, sir. Well, why can't we study the future? Oh, well, and I wanted the job, so I didn't respond to that. Thank you very much. I did get the job and came to Clear Lake, met Chris and Jim Fowles, who was the other founding faculty member for the Futures program. Oliver Markley came a few years later, and I hung around with the folks because I had joined sociology in the late '60s, as Chris said, a time of great turbulence, to study social movements, to study social change. And so it still took me 5 or 6 years to say, wait a minute, social change, future studies, social change, future studies. Oh, those are the same things. And Chris and the rest of the faculty allowed me to start teaching and directing the program. So I took that over in 1983 and was with the university for all of those times. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk a little bit about, and that university at that time, as we'll talk about, was truly a different experience. And we'll get to that, I think, in the next question.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Peter, and welcome again. Well, Jennifer, if you can unmute and tell us a little bit about when you onboarded and a little bit about your experience here. You were first, like myself, you were first a student and then later faculty. Tell us what brought you to this campus and your experience.
I heard about the future from a speechwriter that I attended a conference on doing speech writing, and I was working in communications at the time. And he said, people who write speeches have to know about the future. And that really intrigued me, and I didn't know how you did that. So I went on a bit of a walkabout. I went to the Office of Technology Assessment that was serving Congress at the time, theoretically delving into the future consequences and impacts of new technologies. And I talked to other people who worked in the future. And then I heard about this strange program in Texas, in Houston. I was in New England at the time, so that looked like a pretty big change. And it was. I had to get used to eating Texan style, which as a vegetarian was rather difficult. I remember coming to the university and dashing down early to the cafeteria in order to get hold of some Brussels sprouts before they doused them in pork fat. So that was my early days at the university as a student. But I was enthralled to realize what I'd come into, to find out that this Studies of the Future program really did look at the future and really had a strong and organized system for doing so. So that you could set up all kinds of structures to help you create what was essentially an uncertainty. And I valued that a lot. And I didn't graduate when I should have, because I went off to Washington, D.C. for an internship, which seemed to me important at the time. But I eventually graduated and had the opportunity of coming back for a year as faculty in 1991. When Oliver Markley was taking a sabbatical. And boy, was that fun. Just great students here, great people. And I got to know a lot of people's, I guess not attitudes to the future, but the ways in which they were going to bring future not only into their lives, but into the lives of many others.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Dwayne, if you'll ask the next question, and we'll move on.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kevin. So each of you, Chris, Peter, Jennifer, have touched on what it was like to be part of a new startup university. But would you share with us what was unique about the University of Houston Clear Lake at that time?
Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Great.
So one of the things that was unique was that deliberately there were not departments at that time. And the faculty suites were set up in such a way that people from the same field were not grouped together. So in my original faculty suite, there was a chemist next to me, there was an economist, there was a historian. And that was really very exciting because it fostered a lot of interdisciplinary conversations and collaborations around the university that would not have been true and have not been true in the other places that I've been, where people are grouped together by discipline. Another thing was, as I said earlier, it was an experiment called an upper level university, where the concept was that instead of entering a 4-year campus after getting a 2-year degree. And sort of starting 2 years late, you would enter a campus that was set up to welcome you as an entering student, where everybody else was in the same boat as a junior or a senior. And then, of course, with the master's programs, it was an opportunity to teach juniors, seniors, and master's students all bundled together, which was an instructional challenge, but also a lot of fun. So those were a couple of the things about it that made it really quite different from any other university that I was aware of in the country at that time.
Wonderful.
Jennifer, you want to go next?
I don't know that I found it so different, because I had graduated from Goddard College in Vermont, which is was at the time one of the experimental union colleges, and that was distance learning, and it was very different from any other university at the time. So UHCL seemed a little more conventional to me, but I liked its sort of down home feeling that you could go anywhere and talk to anyone, and that there was a whole group of us milling around who were all excited about the future. And we had our own futures lab, which was a unique space and much used and much loved.
That's
Wonderful.
great. Yes, Chris and Jennifer have already shared a lot. I think the point I'd like to make, in addition to the integration of learning, is the relevance, because during the 1990s, the big question in Houston and elsewhere was, as Chris pointed out, the growth that was going on because of the oil industry. And we were talking about that continuously. You know, we were reading Limits to Growth, which was published in 1973. And it was a very relevant discussion. And I think other disciplines, other faculty, and we're doing something more than just basically studying and teaching within their own discipline. We really believed we were doing something important in the world of Houston and Texas and the world as a whole. And it was a kind of a missionary concept that we came and we did things that most other universities were not doing, because they had been, as you pointed out, Kevin, they'd been around a long time and they had gotten pretty much traditional in terms of their faculty. And we definitely did not want to produce it that way.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So let me move to the next question. So what were some of the overarching goals, do you think, that everyone on campus had in those first years? What was the sense of what do we have to do here? You know, what, obviously the normal degrees and programs, but what were some other overarching goals that you sense that everyone really believed in or had signed on to that helped shape the university?
Let me call you out, Kevin. I read this question and I said, everyone. This is a university. Everyone didn't agree on anything. So I would say that it was the same at all. But there was, I would say the one thing we did want to be is different. We wanted to be novel. We wanted to be innovative. Now, what we did not know was what we were heading towards. I don't know that we had a goal so much as a desire to be different, to offer students and indeed our faculty and the community something that a traditional university did not have, because we had a great traditional university down the street at the central campus. So we really wanted to be different, I think I think most people would agree with that. Chris, I don't know, you were there before I was. Is that accurate?
No, that's absolutely accurate. I think that the university's leadership at that time shaped things to some extent. The Chancellor, Alfred Newman, and Peter has referenced Dean Calvin Cannon, were both very strong advocates of the arts. And so there was a lot of art that was brought into the campus, including the sculpture that's in front of the Bayou building, which we had a colloquial term for that I will not use on this program. The emphasis on classic liberal arts education, I would say, was something that the two of them would have emphasized, that students should have a broad grounding in many kinds of knowledge. I would also say the campus was strongly shaped by being right by the Johnson Space Center. A lot of the students were associated with the center. It was a time of aspiration for the space program. And so we were called on by NASA to help in a variety of ways. And I know that I learned a lot by helping with the training of the astronauts, the shuttle mission specialists, and so on, including eventually the space shuttle simulator, which was quite a piece of engineering for that time.
Okay. Jennifer, any thoughts, or should we go to the next question?
I just want to say again, now I'm thinking about it, how much there was a strong sense of community in the university at that time, and how much I appreciated that, especially as a non-Texan, one of the Yankees that you're supposed to freeze. Coming in, everybody was really welcoming and willing to get engaged with you. And we had the opportunity to engage with the industry in the Houston area, and including NASA, of course, who were very friendly and open, particularly to us future students. I do remember hearing, though, a NASA person telling me that they were making projections based on one data point. And I'm thinking, oh boy, we're not allowed to do that in the futures program.
Thank you. Thank you. Dwayne?
As we highlight some of the positive moments, can you tell me any of the challenges or obstacles in getting the university operational and working together as a unit?
Well, the central campus was not excited about the idea that there would be a campus in Clear Lake, and kind of opposed it, but the legislature insisted. We were viewed as like the crazy stepchild. They were a traditional campus, and we were those weird people down in Clear Lake who had all these strange things going on the campus. And I think it was a mixture of envy and concern in terms of what we were up to. So we were always in a little bit of a precarious position because the power in the system was quite dubious about Clear Lake as an experiment. And I won't say that people from the central campus ever came down and said, wow, that looks interesting, maybe we should do that up there. No. We were definitely seen as weird.
And Chris is talking about the 1970s, but we also have to say that the challenges changed. We got a new administration around 1980, and that challenge from not just the central campus, but indeed for most of the constituents in the university, the challenge was to maintain that spirit of integrated learning, multidisciplinary, heterogeneous. I mean, one of the first things was that they put us all into disciplinary suites. We had a huge shuffling of offices in the early 1980s, and basically we're with now our colleagues in the same department, the way every other university. And that was just an indication that most of the new faculty at that time, most of the students, most of the business community didn't get an idea of what we were doing either. So maintaining that spirit and maintaining that missionary view that we were going to do something absolutely different and everybody was going to love it, I think was a big challenge. And frankly, in the 1980s, there were pockets of that. Those of us that had been there in the 70s kept that spirit. But the university as a whole, I think, turned to become quite traditional at that time. Chris, you were still there till 1990. Is that your experience?
Very much so. We talk about regression to the mean as something that happens a lot. And there was a regression to the mean at UH Clear Lake. And it was, driven bottom up. It wasn't driven top down. It was faculty who'd come from traditional places, wanted to feel comfortable in a traditional place, students who had come out of traditional institutions and so on. So it was a struggle and ultimately a struggle that was lost. But But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot learned from it, and that doesn't mean that other places outside of Houston didn't benefit from seeing the strengths and the limits of the model that we worked on.
It may be lost until now. We're going to talk about that in just a moment.
Indeed, indeed. Any thoughts, Jennifer, or would you like for me to progress to the area of the future trends in higher education?
I concur.
Okay.
I agree with what I've heard.
Excellent. Well, one of the things that really we wanted the three of you to embrace today and to help educate us and help us think through, obviously, is the future of higher education. You know, we talked, and I really appreciate the remembrances of the uniqueness that was Clear Lake when we began and still is in many respects. So let me simply ask, and I know that this should be quite easy. This is your bailiwick. This is the three of you are the experts in this area. What do you sense are some of the major challenges for colleges and universities that we will face over the next 25 years? And you know, those challenges, how do you generally see higher education responding to those, either positively or negatively? Because that is kind of sets up the next question. So who wants to start off with the big question, right? Is what's higher education going to face in the next 25 years?
Well, I'd love to hear from Jennifer, because I think higher education is a service industry. And so the real question is, where's the workplace going? And what does that mean for what kinds of outcomes we should be generating?
Yeah, well, you put me on the spot a bit there, because I have to say that I think the current assumptions about higher education are going to be very difficult to manage in the future, especially in relation to the needs for skills and the need for lifetime learning. I mean, universities have always said that they were in for lifetime learning, but it's never really kind of come out that way. It's still running on the old 1950s model, is that you come out of high school and you go to university and you get an education and then you're all set for life. But that's not true anymore. And it's not going to be true anymore. And people are going to have to find alternative ways to manage their lives and to educate themselves throughout their lives and into the jobs and kinds of work that will become available to them. So it's kind of general, but I do think we have to look pretty closely at what we're offering and see if it's even in the right bailiwick. Research, yes. Education,
I'd like to channel Chris a little bit here and share a remembrance. It was the late 1980s, 88 or so, and I attended a talk that Chris gave. I think it was at the Hilton Hobby Airport Hotel, in which he introduced the concept of hyperlinks. 1988. And that obviously is the big bang of a lot of our world, and that's the internet and the World Wide Web and things like that. And it seems obvious. My gosh, are we still talking about that? Isn't that like old news? Isn't that already there? But the impact it has on education, I think, is yet to be profound. It's yet to be felt, because I still believe that the traditional educational mindset is to transmit information, knowledge, from a previous generation to a new generation, so that they can use that knowledge for their success in life and as adults. It is an instructional approach. And as Jennifer pointed out, you can now find almost all of that information available instantly. You can't find what to do with it, which is a skill. So I believe if we are going to be challenging higher education, we have to put aside the sharing of knowledge as the primary motive. It's still there. You have to know things, but you also, most importantly, have to know what to do with things. So shifting away from a primarily information transmission model to a skills acquisition model is going to be, I think, a really big challenge. And that, I think, will serve Jennifer's workplace, because in the future, what we have really done, Jennifer, I appreciate your lifelong learning. What we've really done is prepared students for lifelong studying. which is, to participate in formal education. And once they get out of school, well, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. Learning is really something else, and particularly informal learning and learning on one's own and learning throughout life. So if we can shift from information to skills as the primary motivation, not 100%, I think that'll be, but that's going to be a challenge, because if most of us were not trained in that, we don't consider that our mission, we don't know how to do it. And so it's going to take a pretty steep learning curve to respond to that challenge, in my estimation.
Chris, any thoughts?
Well, I think that one of the most fundamental questions every organization needs to ask itself, and it needs to ask itself frequently, is what business are we in? I live 90 miles north of Newport, Rhode Island, and there are some wonderful mansions in Newport, Rhode Island that were built a century ago in what Mark Twain called the Gilded Age, with very, very opulent furnishings and lifestyles. And within 20 years of the time those mansions were built, they were essentially empty, and the Gilded Age had collapsed. A lot of the Gilded Age was based on railroad fortunes. And the reason that it collapsed is that people thought they were in the railroad business, but they weren't. They were in the transportation business. And so they were hammered by the automobile and hammered by the airplane. I think all three of us have said in different ways, we are not in the education business anymore. We're not in the degree business. We're not in the course business. We're in the learning business and the lifelong learning business. And that's a really different business, more different than the automobile is from the railroad. And if we don't step in to meet those needs, somebody else will. And our mansions will be the ones that don't look so good 10 or 20 years from now.
I'm glad you made that distinction, Chris. But on the other hand, I like to tell people that the university has no monopoly on learning. People learn as natural human beings, and they can find a lot of what they need to learn and even acquire skills outside the university. What the university has a monopoly on is the credentialing business. We're the only ones who can offer you a master's degree, a bachelor's degree. Now that I suspect will change in the future. So our business model is going to be changed. And that, I think, is going to be one of the fundamental challenges we're going to look for. How can we create an institution where it's challenged on the learning side, and yet where the credential is not perhaps as a monopoly anymore?
Okay. Dwayne, if you'd like to pose the next question, please.
Yes, and prior to me posing that next question, participants, thank you very much for posting your questions. We will get to them at the end of the conversation. But as we proceed with these questions, would you allow us to hear what you think are the major opportunities that would be present for higher education over the next 25 or more years?
Well, I think one opportunity is upskilling and building adult capacity, because the pandemic is just the tip of the iceberg for a very turbulent half century that we're about to enter. And I'll say more about this in the workshop that I do. But it's going to be a time of great disruption. It's going to be a time sort of like 1910 to 1960, 2 world wars, a global pandemic, the Great Depression, the start of an endless war between capitalism and communism. This is going to be a comparable kind of half century, for better or for worse. And so people are going to need to be prepared for multiple careers. They're going to need to be prepared for the half-life of their knowledge and skills being shorter than might have been true historically for graduates of higher education. And at the same time, the traditional demographic is shrinking because of population trends. So if we focus primarily only on younger students, then we're sort of fighting for the deck chairs on the Titanic. If we expand to think about that population and people who are adults, who aren't necessarily looking for a degree, as Peter says, but they're looking for learning, if we weave them in, then that becomes an exciting opportunity.
Very true.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, let me go back to Chris's The Learning Business. My utopian idea, which I guess you could say would be an opportunity, is to change the mindset of the world, the faculty, the students, the community, from a faculty member being a teacher, which has that implicit instructional basis, and changing that to a faculty member being a master learner, a person who likes to learn, a person who's good at learning. So if you want to be a learner, and as we pointed out, lifelong learning, as Jennifer said, is the hallmark of future adult upskilling throughout life. We should be the teachers of learners. Like if you want to learn to dance, you go to a master dancer and who likes to dance and likes to share what they know about dance. If you want to play football, you go to a coach. We should be thinking of ourselves as master learners and inviting students, not making it a gatekeeping function, but inviting them to join with us on a learning journey as we are still learning and they are learning. If you're going to throw pots, you go to somebody who's really good at throwing pots. Well, he's still learning or she's still learning. And I'm going to be with them as a kind of an apprentice, a kind of a mentoring program. If that were the spirit of the university, I think we would have a much better opportunity to serve society as it's entering into this turbulent period.
Wonderful. Jennifer, thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking about a university as a place to live, actually. I think the business model will work for that in the future. I've recently spent time in Ann Arbor, in Tempe, Arizona, and in Austin, Texas, and they are places to live. They are communities. I think what's driving them is not so much learning or kids going to college as research and new knowledge and innovation. And it's a huge potential business model. I don't think every university can go there, but I think the place to live is very attractive, especially since we now don't necessarily have to live next to our work as we used to have to do.
Well said. So here's the great question. You're the futurist. Help us out here. What should universities and colleges do now to start preparing and positioning itself internally and externally for the forces that you have very eloquently laid out? So what should universities and colleges start doing right now to be ready to address these challenges that you've articulated?
There's one word that jumped into my mind as I read this question, and it sounds trite, but it's innovate. And I go back to our discussion of the early days at Clear Lake. There was a great spirit of doing something new, novel, innovative. It was not traditional planning. You said what were the goals that everybody had? I don't know that we had them, but we knew that the traditional model was something that we did not want to do. It wasn't fun. And it might not have been good for society, but we were on a journey of experimentation. And I think that if one were to address the long-term challenges, just do different things that for the moment look like they will be valuable. And I think you'll be a lot better off than trying to sustain the traditional model.
Jennifer, Chris, thoughts?
One of the things we haven't talked about so far that really drives a lot of my work is the tremendous loss of human talent that we're seeing, and the injustices and inequities between the privileged and the marginalized when everybody has a tremendous amount of talent to be unleashed. We have a lot of trapped intelligence that we're losing at a time when we need every scrap that we can find to handle the very difficult challenges we're facing. One of the comments in the chat referred to UH Downtown, which was another innovative satellite campus of the university, also perhaps not getting the recognition it deserved from the central campus, but very much oriented towards bringing into the college experience populations who historically had been excluded. And I think they also made very valuable contributions. And I think that part of the new model this time is perhaps combining some of the mission of UH Downtown and some of the historic mission of UH Clear Lake, and saying we can only succeed in this business of upskilling, capacity building, new types of skills for a new type of world if those are universally available. Because a society that's based on injustice cannot stand in the long run, and universities need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Well said. Jennifer, thoughts?
Well, I do agree with that. I think it's a difficult task, though, for universities to be all things to all people. And I think it's important to carve out a unique mission for who you are, where you are, who are the people you serve, and what's the future for your particular area. And I think that's going to be different by university. And I don't think we're going to get rid of the big elite universities anytime soon. But on the other hand, I think we have to, I guess, bring a mission of what the importance is of learning and education over a lifetime, and that you don't ever have to feel that you've lost, that there's always a place you can come, even if it's relatively late in your life, and even if you don't think that you have any real opportunities ahead, you do. And the university could be there as a stepping stone to that.
That sparks an interesting idea, Jennifer, if we were to downplay or even eliminate the concept of graduation. Is really that milestone in life where you are in education and now you're not, and that's it.
Right.
You know, so we don't graduate anybody. You join University of Houston Clear Lake and you are a learner in that institution in some form or fashion forever. Would that be a wonderful concept? You never graduate.
Interesting.
Wasn't that the original concept of universities, as people became members? And
Yeah,
they
well,
were,
there were degrees, but yeah, I guess, yeah, much more.
they were members for life. Yeah,
Right.
I like it.
Great. I think, Dwayne, I think you wanted to ask the question about the.
I feel that you actually alluded to this next question in that comment of, do we need graduations, or is it a continuum of learning? So with this next question, how do you see the role of a public regional university in the future, 25 years plus out?
Well, I take Jennifer's point, and it's a good one, about the fact that you can't be all things to all people.
No.
And that it makes sense to have a mission that's a defined mission, and do your best to accomplish that. And what that implies is that then higher education becomes much more of an ecosystem that has different niches in it, and the species in the ecosystem interact and support one another and promote a healthy overall environment, as opposed to everybody wanting to be the elephant, which is a lot of what happens in higher education. Everybody wants to be Harvard. Well, if every place was Harvard, the system would collapse, because Harvard does some things and doesn't do others. And we need that kind of balance. So I think the really interesting question is, given its location, given its political climate, given its history, given its current faculty and students and leadership, what part of the ecosystem could UH Clear Lake be, and what niche could it fill? And just as I was excited about that in 1974, I'm excited about that today, because I think there's a lot of advantages that this campus has that it perhaps isn't fully realizing.
As we go through the disruption that we're in, which is an object lesson in the future, obviously, where we've accelerated change, one of the things we know that often happens is that boundaries begin to go away. They become permeable, like graduation is a boundary between school and work, and that after a while might not be the most important thing, and we try and downplay that. The other boundary is the boundary between the university and the community. I had the privilege in the 1990s to work for a legendary governor, former Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Bill Hobby, whose Hobby obviously was family owned the other newspaper when it was around, and the Hobby Airport and all that. He teamed up with Ken Lay of famous of Enron fame, and they chaired a commission on the vision for the University of Houston system and pulled in wonderful people all over, educators and community members. And the vision of that was a university, it sounds a little trite, but a university that was permeable, where the community was in the university, physically and academically, teaching and sharing and working. And the faculty was in the community, working in the schools, working in the companies, working in the community organizations. And again, you can't do that completely, but I would make it's a membrane. Chris is the science educator here. A membrane that's allowing materials and people and ideas to pass that, and not create the ivory tower, not create the separateness that a university is. So I think a public institution, obviously supported by public funds, and a regional institution which has a region, which has a constituent in its area. Not that it is confined to that, because we're of course global now. But I think there is a role to become a permeable membrane, if I can use that metaphor, in terms of the interchange between the community and the university.
Jennifer, any thoughts about that interface with the university and the community, that membrane concept, if you will?
I'm mulling the memory concept. I think it's a good one because I think integration with the community is going to be the key anyway to our new model of learning and finding skills that serve us throughout life and throughout different kinds of work. So I'm not sure how you do it. I guess I better keep mulling on that.
I think that's the purpose of today, is for us to discuss those items that really need to be discussed to get us to that next place and position ourselves.
Indeed.
Just to kind of as a follow-up question, what would be from your perspectives, the one biggest challenge in making this transformation from traditional educational institutions to this membrane model, if you will, in terms of having less boundaries between the university and the community? What would be, from your perspectives, just generally, what you think will be the biggest challenge in higher educational institutions in making that transition?
I mean, you have to begin with mindset. We all are socialized into a particular role in life, and faculty have a mindset. They're not uniform, and there's a lot of diversity and a lot of disagreement even. But a mindset that it changes simply from teaching to learning centered. A mindset that doesn't see education as a separate institution or a separate period of life, but rather as life, as part of life throughout. A mindset that we're not in a closed system, we're in an open ecosystem. So getting, and that's not easy to do. That's we in future studies remember the video that Joel Barker made in the late 1980s on paradigms. In fact, Chris and I had an engagement with IBM. We were traveling around the country and teaching in IBM factories about future studies And they required us to play that video. I saw that video about 20 times, right, Chris? Do you remember
Yep.
Barker's video? I mean, in 1990, you couldn't use the word paradigm without getting a Twitter from the audience because it had been so overplayed and so overused. Well, now that day is gone, and now we can say a paradigm change, a transformation of thought, a transformation of perspective. That it's not the beginning, it's not the first thing. In fact, one other way of your kind of theory of change is go out and do something. You know, this was a phrase in the 60s. Don't just stand there, do something. And they didn't say what to do, just go do something. And that's what I meant by innovation. I mean, let's not talk this to death. Let's create something new. Let's learn from it, and let's go on and keep going back and forth like that.
Other thoughts, Jennifer?
I think that thinking of ourselves as a community of learners, which all of us have said in different ways, is really important, because I learn as much or more from my students as they learn from me. And they learn as much or more from each other as they do from me. And that doesn't mean they're not learning from me. It just means that all of us have a lot that we bring to the table. And especially if we move towards a real understanding of the power of diversity and the power of cultural relevance and the power of life experience, as opposed to just having had certain kinds of formal academic knowledge poured into your head. People bring a lot of different things to the table. So some greater humility, I guess I would say, on the part of faculty in terms of recognizing that we have a lot to learn. I'm still learning a lot after all these years, because the world keeps changing, because other people know a lot that I don't know. And as long as I'm open to that, and as long as I help to create a community of learning, then I think the whole thing works quite well. But that's not universal within faculty, and it's not universal within visions of what the university is. And I think that's a problem. It's one of the reasons why now universities are getting a pushback from society saying we're not sure that we need you to the extent you think we need you.
I think you just may have said used the word humility and faculty in the same sentence the first time I've ever thought of those two things as an oxymoronic. But Chris, you taught the systems course, invented the systems course, and taught it until you went on to a different university, and I took that over. And you know, in the 1990s, Peter Senge's concept of the learning organization was a very popular concept, and I have talked about it a lot. It is ironic that we don't think of a university as a learning organization. There are learners, particularly faculty who are doing research, and students who are studying and learning what the faculty tell them to learn. But as a learning organization, meaning the culture, the processes, the spirit of the organization is generally we know how to do this, we've got this, and we're not learning anymore. We're not humble about the fact that I know how to do this. I got my doctoral degree, I've got tenure, I will do what I've always done, and I do it well. It's not wrong to do it. But that kind of openness to, I'm not done yet, I'm not done learning yet, is truly part of mindset that would absolutely be necessary.
Interesting. Jennifer, you have the last word on this question.
Well, I'm agreeing with what Chris and Peter are saying, and it makes me wonder about what the future is for the scholar or the person with expertise, the expert. I can see that whole thing changing now. The internet and social media are certain things that both brought some of those scholars into prominence, but also dissed them, really. I mean, because anybody can find out stuff. So over many, many years, scholars and people with expertise have been the supports of a lot of institutions, including the university. And I'm wondering whether, what that role is in the future. Is it necessary? Is it needed? Must we have scholar experts? Can people claim that position anymore with all the information and knowledge out there? I just think it's something probably for individuals to look at as well as the university.
I think I'd make an argument for balance. Expertise does produce knowledge and results, particularly research and scholarship of that traditional sort. But what we have done is revered that, and particularly at a traditional university, a more traditional university like the Central Campus, that is the primary mission, is for experts to continue being experts. We need the balance to also have generalists, which we all are as futurists, who know many, many things. It's the fox versus the hedgehog. Many things which are not, we're not specialists in most anything, but we try and stitch it together. This is what Chris's systems course was about, treating the society as a holistic organism, as an ecosystem, rather than slicing and dicing it up into various disciplinary and reductionist approaches. That, I think, is an attitude that is absolutely necessary. And that's why in the 1970s, why we were all mixed up. We were all talking to our science brothers and sisters and our arts people and the education faculty, whatever, and we were learning from each other. That kind of balance, I think, would be great.
Wonderful.
And Kevin, I hope you don't mind me interrupting, because I'm sort of the connector between the university and industry. And I'm going to ask a question that may be pointed more towards Jennifer, in that if we were to move to a model that is more semi-permeable, community-related learning environment, would that be received and valued by industry?
Oh,
Great question.
are you asking, would industry like the membrane idea?
Well, would they accept it as a student receiving a degree from a semi-permeable learning institution?
Yes, from
Or
this
innovative learning
new
institution.
creature that we've created, right?
Correct.
Well, you know, universities have always done that job for industry in, as Peter said, I think, in credentialing. And so if you take that away suddenly, I think you have to put something else in its place, or you have to do a big job of education of employers in order to understand what they're really getting.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
there's a mindset problem in business as well. I mean, you hire bachelor's degrees, you hire master's degrees because they have the degree. Frankly, they don't know what they know. They don't know what they've learned. But they know they've been through this, rigorous, maybe just simply irrelevant process, but they've survived, they've persevered, they have some degree of self-management, and they've learned a few things along the way, and therefore the degree represents that. I mean, I'm always impressed by the disconnect of what you hear from businesses, Dwayne, and you tell me if it's not true. The CEOs and the leaders want these well-rounded, generally skilled
Critical
people.
thinking. Mm-hmm.
The hiring officer, it wants that 4.0 engineering degree, and whether a person ever read a book that's not an engineering book so they don't test for that, they don't ask for that, they don't evaluate that. So there's a mindset change that I would urge you at Clear Lake to think about, and that is to educate the community at the same time you're trying to educate yourself on what this new concept of a university might be. And you'll have to do that.
Correct.
Wonderful. Well,
I think
go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. I was going to say that's a good bridge to what is UHCL's future.
Indeed. And let me see if I can share this with some degree of authority here. The three of you, of course, have seen to some extent our recent work over the last year and a half, 2 years. We've been very introspective and extrospective in terms of and externally orientated in terms of where we're going. And we have now a new strategic plan entitled Impact 2025, which is our 50th year in existence. And I just would like very much to have you reflect just a little bit on where we're going and basically your advice for us. As you have known, and I'm not going to read this, our new vision is really rooted in our foundation, which is to be very learner-centered. But we want to become nationally prominent in transformative education, which involves not only developing the person, but developing the skill sets that we've been talking about in the context of community partnerships. And our mission is very much around preparing, obviously, the most competitive students we can for entering the workforce. But center in this is the term that we're talking about today, is the focus on lifelong learning. And you can see that the types of core values that we have recently reaffirmed and changed about who we want to be and how we want to act on those particular core values. So before we move, and I want to leave plenty of time for the Q&A portion today, but I would like to ask your thoughts and your insight here. You know better than we do our past. You created the university in many respects. We've been talking over the last number of months about where we're going. I'm not going to get into the complexities of the strategic plan, just thinking about it at a fairly high level here. So what is your best advice for us as an institution to engage our communities in a certain way, to perhaps becoming that permeable membrane that we've been discussing? I'd just like to open it up for just a few minutes before we ask the participants to address, so we can address their questions. What general advice might you give us, since you are in a unique position to do precisely that? Who would like to start?
Well, I think there's a couple interesting tensions here. One of them is between learner-centered and diversity, and one of them is between transformational and community. So diversity means that you can't use what we have now, which is an industrial model of processing students where it's kind of one size fits all. You really have to personalize, and I don't just mean adaptive learning. I mean beginning with the person, their passions, their culture, their goals, and then working to try to empower those. And that's quite complicated when you're doing it with a diverse community, but it's also very, very powerful because again, people bring many things to the table, and the more diverse the ecosystem, the stronger the ecosystem. I also think the transformative and the community are an interesting tension. Often parts of communities are not interested in change. They're perfectly happy with things the way that they are because they benefit from the way that things are. And when you come in and you say, our graduates are going to come out and they're going to help you transform, that may not be what they want to hear. And so how you help students to transform, but how you prepare communities, businesses, governments, all the sectors of society to transform, that's a big order, but it's also, I think, right at the heart of what universities need to be doing.
I had experience in the early 2000s. I worked with a visionary veterinarian and his wife who ran a veterinary clinic down in Lake City. He basically took himself out of the center of the business model. Independent professional like a veterinarian or a dentist or an medical practitioner as a solo performance, everything passes through that person. They don't do just the medicine, they also do the hiring, they do the supervision, they do the accounting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He took himself out of that. He said, I'm the medical person and I'm going to train. And what his staff were mostly high school graduates, young women, and he trained them to talk to customers about medicine, not do medicine, but to tell them, and they basically became the customer representative. So he could do medicine all day long, and they were handling the customer, and his wife was handling the business part and all that. He ran seminars. Probably had several hundred people come to his seminars down at Harbor, South Shore Harbor, right? At the hotel there, and hundreds of people. Not one veterinarian could pull themselves out of that business model. I am in charge, I am the one. So we're really talking about the faculty doing that. The faculty saying, we're here, part of the ecosystem, but we're not the most important person in the ecosystem. And we put the student, as Chris said, at the center of the ecosystem, and we're part of their learning environment, an important part, but we're not the sole practitioner.
Jennifer, would you like to unmute and have some input on this, please?
Yes, I was just muting because of the lawn clipping going on outside my area. I don't have very much to say on this, except that I think what we want is to have the students, when they leave the university, to take something with them, to take a piece of it with them into their lives and into their work. And I think what they take and how they take it is changing, whether they want it to or not. For example, we've been told by our corporate clients over and over again is we want innovation. We need to set up some centers where we can have some innovation. We know where we need to go, but we're not getting any of the innovation. And of course, as anyone would tell you, most of them kill it anyway, once it's born. Unless you find some way to protect it, a big corporation will whack out the innovation as soon as it can. But I think the students need to be able to come back and say, look, I'm having trouble delivering this in my work, in my new community. And I think that the university has to be able to reinforce that feeling that you go away with something that is not only useful for getting a job, but also is useful for understanding how to change and how to build the kind of world you want to be in.
Wonderful.
I know we need to go to questions, which I welcome, but I just want to point out something interesting about this panel. We've all agreed with one another. We've used different terms. We come from different backgrounds, but we've been agreeing about what the future of higher education is facing and where it needs to think about going. There are not many panels on the future of higher education where you find people agreeing with one another. And I think the reason that we agree is that we really think a lot about the future. And when you take the long view and when you think strategically, it gets you past a lot of the tactical battles that higher education is enmeshed in that are paralyzing its ability to change.
Change is, I use a geological metaphor here, Chris, of strata. And when you see a problem or an issue or want to create change, what you want to do is try and tweak the system. And that generally doesn't happen. So you go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And what people, and eventually you get to bedrock. Bedrock, as I would say, Kevin, is your values, mission, vision, all of that. But the way to implement that has to be, we have to be agnostic about how to do that. Does that require credits? Does that require discipline? Things like that. Our colleague Oliver Markley was fond of using the phrase that futurists promote ideas whose time has not yet come. And I think Clear Lake in the 1970s was promoting an idea whose time has not yet come. Integrated, multidisciplinary, student-centered a learning environment that frankly went away in the early 1980s because the constituents were not on board, because our idea had not yet come. Maybe now is the time, 40 years later, 45 years later, to say maybe now the time has come.
Wonderful. Let's go ahead and move to questions as we need to get queued up very shortly for Dr. Dede's presentation at 10:30. So let's take the first couple of questions. So Dwayne, if you want to read the first question, we'll have our panelists respond.
Absolutely. So first question off the bat, what is the best avenue to become a faculty or an adjunct professor?
Given that we're going to be learners, yes.
Correct.
Well, it's one of the reasons to get a doctorate. Most of the people that come into my office and say that they want to have a doctorate, I try to talk out of it because it's a lot of time and grief and blood and sweat and tears and money to get a doctorate, but it is the ticket of admission. But what I would do would be to recognize that although the university may label the doctorate as research, which it is, you also really need to think about developing teaching expertise, because that goes much more towards the future that we're describing.
Great. Peter, here's a question for you. It says that Dr. Bishop brings forward a strong point around philosophical beliefs that are associated with the primary process and the outcomes of the educational institutional process. Is it just really about knowledge acquisition, or more importantly, is it supporting the learners towards not only attaining information, but more importantly, how to work and implement that information in new and different ways? Maybe a little insight.
No, that's exactly the point, that now, as Jennifer said, you can get almost any piece of information you need almost instantly. That's the big bang that we are listening to these days. So the university, as a primary information transmission function, the teacher giving knowledge and testing knowledge of students, which is still, I think, all too traditional, not just in higher education, but in education throughout, is now redundant. I mean, why do I have to sit here and listen to this person tell me what I need to know? I can look most of that stuff up if I ever wanted to, if I ever needed to. What we're trying to say is that it should be not absent knowledge, of course not, but it should be primarily about acquiring skills. So what are you going to do? I had a conversation with a history department at a community college last year, and we got to the point of, okay, so now you are teaching the history of whatever. What do you expect your students to do with that? The use of history versus history itself. It's not facts, it's skills. And that I just reiterate the point. That should be, this is a recommendation. I don't know if this is going to happen, but this is a recommendation where universities should move.
Wonderful. Dwayne,
right. Do the current times give us an opportunity to change course towards a more adaptive, interdisciplinary university model?
So in last March, I and 4 other faculty from different universities started a bottom-up initiative called Silver Lining for Learning. And this was truly bottom-up. We had no sponsor, we have no sponsor, we have no financial backing. We're just trying to make a difference by having conversations every Saturday online and archiving those about the silver lining in the pandemic. The pandemic is a terrible human tragedy, but it has disrupted the dead hand of the past that holds back innovation in education, and it has disrupted the compliance mentality of the present that holds back innovation in education. And so we're seeing a lot of really interesting bottom-up innovation happening worldwide. And if you are curious about where that is, including a lot in global South countries, take a look at the Silver Lining for Learning initiative. So I think that we have the biggest window I have seen in my lifetime to innovate now, but that window will close as the pandemic recedes and comes under control. And so now is the time to be bold about change. Now is the time to innovate, because later the same idea, the system that Peter and I have talked about, is going to fight back tooth and nail, change resistant feedback loops to stop it from going further.
Okay. Here's I think a very interesting question. It says deep knowledge versus sampling several different disciplines, obviously getting into the issue of interdisciplinarity, so, right? So in an increasingly interdisciplinary and complex world, how should universities initially prepare young people for their first degrees? Should we focus on deep expertise in a field or as a generalist? This is particularly true in light of, for example, the new university in London that will move away completely from subjects. And also we see that there's some kindergartens and K through 12 efforts to completely move away from subjects. Problem-based learning being one of the big drivers of that. What are your thoughts about that?
But the premise of the question is it's either or. It's not either or. It's both. We have a system now that emphasizes deep learning, expertise, narrow disciplinary, and that's what professors get credit for, their publications and their research interests. Teaching is there, but frankly, I think it's secondary in many universities in that sense. So how to create the balance, how to have an educational system where we are not strapped into narrow reductionist disciplines. At the same time, we know something about something, and yet we're also able to relate that something to all the other things. So we're talking politics in science class. We're talking literature in history class. We're talking art in education class, where the faculty themselves have not only their expertise, but also a general orientation to knowing something about a lot of different things, and bringing that into the teaching rather than marching through the textbook, which is generally just the disciplinary subject. So it's not either or, it needs to be both.
Okay. Other perspectives, Chris, Jennifer?
Well, in my workshop, I'll talk about a couple models in the US that I think are interesting from Stanford and from Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech is, in fact, a public university. Stanford talks about declaring a passion rather than a major, which I think is a really interesting idea. So maybe your passion is that you want to make a big difference in the lives of marginalized people in global South countries. Well, then it's the university's responsibility to come up with what you need to know. Maybe that's civil engineering because you want to be able to make a big difference in their infrastructure. But then you also need to know a lot about culture, because you need to understand that what you do must be culturally relevant, and you need to know a lot about economics because you need to understand, the straitened economic situation in global South countries. I think that that's one way to get at this issue of, as Peter says, retaining types of knowledge, but moving beyond the primary focus being declaring a discipline. And all of us have said in different ways, you're not a role, you're a suite of skills. And the suite of skills accommodates many roles. So having the university not give you a degree that says, now you're a physicist, but that says, now you understand something about the science of the artificial, but you also understand something about how to apply it to change human lives. And you also understand something about when not to apply it because it's a bad idea. That's a much more interesting kind of a description.
Okay, I need to kind of begin to draw us to a close, unfortunately. This has been a robust and an absolutely wonderful conversation. I really want to thank Dr. Dede, Dr. Bishop, and Jennifer Jarratt for your contributions, your unique insights to the beginning of the university, the forces that will be impinging upon us and other educational institutions, and tailoring that somewhat to what we anticipate to be our experience. I simply want to thank, and I want to thank my colleague Dwayne Busby, and I want to thank Lori Lopez, and I want to thank a number of others that are engaged in helping produce this today, and Reggie Jones in particular, who's been instrumental in making this a seamless event. I do want to suggest that at 10:30 we will begin the first workshop that will be Dr. Dede's, which is the 60-year curriculum. So this is going to be, I think, an exciting start to the beginning here. So that being said, Dwayne, do you have any closing comments, or shall we go ahead and transition to the first workshop?
I do believe we should transition, but I'll be remiss by not saying thank you, Chris, Peter, and Jennifer. From the first concept of this idea that was put together by President Blake and Dr. Wooten, to planning it with Lori, Reggie, and the University Advancement team, to seeing the actual fruition of this program is very encouraging. Encouraging not only as a practitioner in higher education, not as a faculty member, more on the administrative side, but seeing where we are and how we're going to impact our future. Those students who are not even out of diapers yet. is what we're talking about here. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And yes, let's go ahead and transition.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Please do join us for the next workshop involving Dr. Dede and the 60-year curriculum. We've enjoyed. Oh yes, the virtual reception is next. We're going to have an opportunity for you to engage each of our panelists, ask your particular questions, and let's go ahead and transition to that now. I know that they're anxious to, we'll have the opportunity to visit with each one individually as well as collectively. So let's go ahead and transition to that now. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.